My son said, "My mother's signature is just a formality," and he said it while facing me. He wasn't saying it to me. That was the part that took me a moment to understand. Daniel was standing at the head of the conference table on the fourth floor of the building I bought in 1997, talking to a man in a charcoal suit that nobody had introduced me to, and he was turned toward my side of the room, the way you turn toward a window or a lamp. Something in the room, not someone in it. His mouth shaped the words slowly and clearly, the way he'd learned to speak in front of investors, and every syllable landed on me like a stone dropped in still water. I have been reading lips since I was 6 years old. 41 years of watching mouths in classrooms and courtrooms and loading docs and bank offices, learning the difference between a man saying, "We can do that," and a man saying, "We can do that for now." My son has known this about me his entire life. He has also, his entire life, forgotten it the second it stopped being convenient. He grew up in a house where his mother didn't hear him, and somewhere along the way he decided that meant his mother didn't know things. The man in the charcoal suit said something I caught only halfway, because he had his hand near his chin. But I got the shape of the last part. Closing by the end of the quarter. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I'm 68 years old. I started Hayes Industrial Coatings in a rented garage off Harry Hines Boulevard in Dallas with $4,000, a used mixing drum, and a husband who left 11 months later because he couldn't stand the way people looked at us in restaurants when I signed for my order. I built that company for 29 years before I let my son put his name on a business card in it. We coat steel, bridge components, tank interiors, the unglamorous industrial work that nobody photographs and everybody depends on. Last year, we did $51 million in revenue. There are 94 people on our payroll, and I know the name of every single one of them, and I know which of them has a daughter starting nursing school in the fall. Daniel is my only child. He is 39 years old. He has my mother's jawline and his father's talent for the confident sentence, and I brought him into this company because I wanted him to have something solid under his feet, in a world that had never given me anything solid at all. 2 years ago, I made him Chief Executive Officer. I stayed on his chair. I told myself it was time. I told the board it was time. I even believed it, most days. That morning, I had come in early because the meeting invitation on my calendar said Q3 Strategic Alignment, and I wanted to review the coatings margins before anyone else got there. I sat down at the seat they'd put out for me, which was 2 chairs farther from the head of the table than the one I'd sat in for 29 years, and I did not think anything of it. That's the detail I keep coming back to. I noticed the chair and thought nothing of it. If you like stories about real people, about the things families do to each other and the quiet ways people take their lives back, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel reach the people who need to hear this kind of story. Then stay with me, because what happened in that room is only the beginning of it. Because here's what my son didn't know, standing there at the head of my table telling a stranger that my signature was a formality. He was wrong about the signature. There was a document in a safe deposit box at a Frost Bank branch on Mockingbird Lane that he had never seen, that his lawyers had never seen, that had been sitting there gathering dust since the spring of 2011 for exactly this reason. My son thought he was arranging a sale. He was arranging his own reckoning. And he did it in front of the one person in that room who could read every word of it off his face. I stayed in that chair for the rest of the meeting. That's the first thing people get wrong about me. They assume that when something breaks, I react. I don't. I was a deaf girl in a Dallas public school in 1964, which meant I learned before I was 10 that the moment you show a room what you're feeling, the room decides what to do with you. So I sat in the chair they'd moved for me, 2 seats down from where I belonged, and I kept my face exactly as pleasant as it had been when I walked in. And I watched every mouth in that room for the next 50 minutes. Here is what I learned in those 50 minutes. The man in the charcoal suit was named Ross Kemper, which I got when Daniel turned to him and said his full name while gesturing at the projector. He worked for a holding company out of Houston. He said the words portfolio consolidation twice and legacy asset once, and the second time he said it, he glanced at me, not at my eyes, at the space near my shoulder. And I understood that in the arithmetic of that room, I was the legacy asset. There was a woman with him, younger, taking notes on a tablet, and she was the only person there who looked directly at my face when she spoke. I noticed that. I filed it away. Daniel talked for most of it. My son is good in a room, and I'd be lying if I said watching him wasn't complicated. He has a way of leaning slightly forward when he's about to say something he wants people to remember, and I taught him that. I taught him that in the kitchen on Vandalia Street when he was 15 and terrified of a debate tournament. He does it now to strangers who want to buy my company, and there is no word for what that feels like. Twice he glanced at me and smiled. Not a guilty smile, a patient one, the kind you give a relative you've brought to a dinner party. Around the 40-minute mark, he said something to Kemper with his hand half covering his mouth, which is the thing hearing people do when they think they're being discreet, and I only got the tail end of it. 3 words, clean as a bell. She'll be fine. At noon, everyone stood up and shook hands. Daniel came around the table, took my elbow the way he'd been doing for about a year now, as though my legs had gone bad along with my ears, and he signed, badly, with the stiff, guessing hands of a man who took 2 semesters of it in college and never bothered again. Good meeting. Then he wrote on the notepad in front of me, in his big, impatient handwriting, housekeeping stuff. Boring. Lunch Sunday? I wrote back, Sunday. And then I went down to my office on the 3rd floor, closed the door, sat down at the desk my father built me out of scrap oak in 1996, and did not move for a long time. I want to be careful here, because I've heard people tell stories like this and they always jump straight to the anger, and that isn't how it went. What I felt first wasn't rage. It was a kind of vertigo, like missing a step in the dark. 29 years of building, and my brain kept snagging on the stupidest detail, the chair. Somebody had physically moved a chair. Somebody had stood in that room before I got there and made a decision about where the founder should sit, and then gone and gotten coffee. At some point that afternoon, Marcy came in. Marcy Delgado has been my assistant for 22 years. She signs better than my son does, and she has never once in those 22 years pretended not to notice something. She stood in the doorway and looked at my face and asked, with her hands, "What happened up there?" I told her nothing had happened. She looked at me for a second longer than that answer deserved, and then she said, "Okay," and went back to her desk. But she left the door open a few inches on her way out, which is what she does when she wants me to know she's there. I drove home that night down Harry Hines, which is not the fastest way to my house, and I pulled over across from a strip of low buildings near Regal Row and sat in the car with the engine running. The garage is still there. Somebody sells tires out of it now. In February of 1997, that building was mine for $420 a month, and I want you to understand what that meant. I had $4,000, which was everything from my mother's estate and everything from 11 years of working the front office at a coatings distributor, where I was very good at my job, and where a man named Carl told me, kindly, in the tone people use when they think they're doing you a favor, that they'd never put me in front of a customer. So I bought a used mixing drum. I bought a compressor with a cracked housing that I patched myself. I learned to spray industrial epoxy on scrap steel in that garage until my hands shook, and the first 6 months I did not get a single contract, because getting contracts in the coatings business in 1997 meant standing in a job trailer with 4 men in boots and convincing them, and the second they realized I couldn't hear them, the meeting was over. Not rudely. Almost never rudely. They'd get uncomfortable and start talking to whoever was next to me, even if whoever was next to me was a 19-year-old kid I'd brought to carry samples. My husband Ray stayed for 11 months of that. He wasn't a bad man. He was a man who'd married a woman he thought of as brave, and then discovered he'd have to be brave too, in restaurants, in front of his brother, in a job trailer off I-35. And it turned out he didn't have it. He left in January of 1998. Daniel was 11. Ray sent birthday cards for 4 years and then stopped. What saved the company was a bridge. Not a big one. A county overpass in Ellis County. Steel girders. And the contractor was a man named Sam Whitfield, who was 71 years old and mostly deaf in his right ear from 30 years of jackhammers. He watched me write my bid on a legal pad in a trailer that smelled like diesel and cigarettes, and he watched me point at the corrosion on his existing girders and write the word chlorides. And he laughed and said something I read clean off his mouth even in that bad light. Well, hell, nobody else looked at the steel. He gave me the job, $18,000. I hired 2 people that spring, and one of them, a kid named Tomas Reyes, who couldn't read a spec sheet yet and worked like the building was on fire, is now my production supervisor, and it's his daughter who starts nursing school in the fall. That's what my son was selling. Not $51 million in revenue. That. Sunday lunch was at his house in Preston Hollow, the one with the pool nobody swims in. His wife Vanessa made a lamb thing she'd seen online, and my granddaughter Ruby, who is 9 and signs better than her father because she taught herself off videos, sat next to me and told me about a boy in her class who eats crayons. Ruby signs with her whole body. She spells fast and wrong and then laughs at herself. For about 20 minutes at that table, I forgot why I'd come. Then Daniel took a call and walked out to the patio with the phone against his left ear, and through the glass door, I watched his mouth for 2.5 minutes. I got maybe half of it. Angles are hard, and he kept turning. But I got the mother's the only variable, and I got no. She signs where I tell her. And then he laughed at something and said, look, she's 68 and she can't hear a room. She has no idea what year the tax code changed. He came back in and asked me how the lamb was. I told him it was wonderful. I asked him about the Ellis County retrofit bid because I wanted to see what he'd do, and he waved his hand and said we were moving away from that kind of work, that the margins were thin and the future was in higher value specialty coatings. He said it slowly and clearly, facing me, the way he does when he's decided the conversation is going to be simple. Ellis County is where Sam Whitfield gave me my first job. Sam has been dead 9 years. Daniel doesn't know his name. That night, before I left, Ruby hugged me at the door and signed "Love you, Gran" and got the hand shape wrong, the way she always does. And I held on to her a second longer than I meant to. I want to say something about my son that isn't flattering to me. I made him this way. Not all of it, but some of it. Daniel grew up in a house where his mother was gone 14 hours a day, and where the world outside kept telling him, in 100 small ways, that his family was strange. Kids at school did the thing kids do with their hands. Ray stopped sending cards. And I decided, somewhere in there, that the way I'd make it up to him was to make him proud of me. To be so successful that nobody could look at us sideways again. So I built. I bought the building on Denton Drive in 2003. We went from 11 employees to 40 in 5 years. I put him through SMU, and then through the Austin Venture, the software thing with his roommate that burned through $200,000 of my money in 19 months, and taught him, as far as I can tell, that money is something that arrives. He came back to Dallas in the fall of 2019 with no job and a lot of ideas. I gave him a desk and a vague title in business development, and he was, honestly, pretty good at it. Clients liked him. He remembered their kids' names. For 3 years, he was around the company without really being in it. And then in 2024, the board and my own tired body agreed it was time, and I made him Chief Executive Officer of Hayes Industrial Coatings, and I stood up at the all-hands in the shop with the smell of solvent in the air and told 90-some people that my son would take care of them. Tomas Reyes shook his hand that day. I saw Tomas's face while he did it. I didn't think about that face again for 2 years. On Monday, I went to work early and I did what I should have done a month before. I asked Marcy to pull every board packet from the last 18 months. She didn't ask me why. She brought them in 2 stacks and sat down across from me without being invited, which she has earned, and we went through them together for 5 hours with a legal pad between us. Marcy is 54. She has a laugh you can feel through a wall, and she was a court interpreter before she came to me. Nothing in a document has ever intimidated that woman. Here is what was in those packets. In March, a strategic options review approved as a routine agenda item, buried on page 19 under facilities maintenance. In June, an engagement letter with a Houston advisory firm, Kemper's firm, signed by Daniel as CEO under a delegated authority, I had voted to give him myself for operational contracts, in a meeting where he'd told me it was about equipment leasing. And in August, 4 weeks before I sat 2 chairs down from where I belonged, a non-binding letter of intent from Meridian Holdings to acquire Hayes Industrial Coatings. The number was $62 million. There was a closing timeline attached. There was a special board meeting scheduled for the 19th of October, 19 days from that Monday, at which the shareholders of record would vote to approve the transaction. Marcy wrote on the legal pad, in block letters so I wouldn't have to ask her to repeat, "Did you know about any of this?" I wrote, "No." She looked at that word for a while. Then she got up and closed my door all the way, which in 22 years she had never done, and came back and sat down. And then we found the last folder. It was in the September packet, in a subfolder labeled Governance, Chair Transition, and it contained 3 things. A draft press release announcing that founder Eleanor Hayes would be stepping into an emeritus advisory role. A memo from Daniel to the board, dated the 12th of September, describing his growing concern about his mother's engagement in day-to-day operations, her difficulty following board discussion, her increasing reliance on written summaries, and what he called, in a sentence I have read probably 400 times since, a pattern consistent with age-related cognitive decline, and a scheduled appointment, in my name, with a neurologist in Plano, for the 6th of October. I had never made that appointment. I had never heard of that doctor. Marcy's hands were shaking. Mine weren't, which surprised me, because I understood, sitting at my father's oak desk with that folder open in front of me, exactly what my son had built. He wasn't just selling the company. He couldn't just sell the company. He needed my shares, and if he couldn't get my signature, the next best thing was a paper trail showing that the old deaf woman didn't understand what she was signing anyway. He was going to take my company by proving I'd lost my mind. And the thing is, he'd been careful. Every document was clean. Every step was defensible. My son had thought about all of it. He had thought about all of it except one afternoon in the spring of 2011, in a lawyer's office on Ross Avenue, with a woman named Patricia Ordonez and a document that nobody had looked at in 15 years. In February of 2011, I was 53 years old, and there was a mass on my thyroid that 4 different people used the word probably about. It turned out to be nothing. I want to say that up front, because that isn't the part of the story that matters. The part that matters happened in a consultation room at Presbyterian on a Tuesday morning, when the surgeon came in to walk me through what they were going to do. Daniel drove me. He was 24. He'd flown in from Austin, and he was scared in the way young men get scared, which is to say, he was very busy being useful. He carried my bag. He filled out my forms. The surgeon came in, sat down, opened the folder, and started talking to Daniel. I want to be precise about this. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't even impatient. He was a tired man with a full schedule who had glanced at a chart, seen a note about a hearing-impaired patient, and made a decision about where the conversation was going to happen. He explained the procedure to my son. He explained the risks to my son. And then, at the end, he turned about a quarter of the way toward me and asked Daniel, with me sitting 18 inches away, watching his mouth make every single word, "Does she understand what we're doing?" And my son said yes. He didn't look at me first. That's the whole thing, right there. He didn't turn and check. He answered for me, and he did it easily, the way you'd answer for a child or a dog, and then he went back to nodding at the doctor. He was 24 and terrified, and he wasn't trying to erase me. But he did it in 1 second flat, without a flicker, and I sat there in a paper gown and understood something about how the rest of my life was going to go. 3 weeks later, healthy and cleared, I went to see Patricia Ordonez. Patricia's office was on Ross Avenue, up a staircase, over a check-cashing place. She was 50-something, built like a fire hydrant, and she'd represented me since the Ellis County job because she was the only lawyer in Dallas who, in 1998, had bothered to write things down on a legal pad without being asked. I told her I wanted to give Daniel a real ownership stake in the company, 26%. Not a promise, not a someday, shares in his name so that whatever happened to me, my son would have something solid under his feet. Patricia said fine. Then she asked me a question. She asked me what was the one thing I couldn't survive. I thought she meant losing the business. I started to say something about the money, about the employees, and she stopped me and said, "No, that's not what I asked." And I sat in that office over the check cashing place and I told her about the consultation room, the quarter turn. Does she understand what we're doing? Yes. Patricia wrote for a while. Then she slid a page across the desk. The gift went through, all 26% of it, but it went through with a covenant attached, a condition she wrote in plain language and then had a colleague make bulletproof. The voting rights on those shares were conditional, and they terminated automatically and permanently, reverting to me if the holder ever took any action to have me declared incapacitated, to remove me from the chair on grounds of diminished capacity, or to represent to any third party that I was unable to understand or execute my own decisions. I remember laughing at her. I told her it was insulting. I told her Daniel would never. She said, "Then it'll sit in a box and cost you nothing." He signed it. He was 24 and he'd have signed a receipt for the moon. 2 copies. One in her file, one in a safe deposit box at the Frost Bank branch on Mockingbird Lane, where it sat for 15 years, while I paid $40 a year to keep a drawer I never opened. On the Tuesday after Marcy and I found the folder, I opened it. The paper had gone slightly yellow at the fold. Patricia's initials were in the margin in green ink because she never used blue like everyone else. I stood in that little booth at the bank with my reading glasses on and read every word twice. And then I went out to my car and sat in the parking lot on Mockingbird with the document on the passenger seat, and I put my hands over my face. He'd written a memo to the board on the 12th of September. A pattern consistent with age-related cognitive decline. He hadn't just tripped the wire. He'd walked the length of it. Patricia is 71 now and lives outside Fredericksburg with a garden she complains about constantly. I drove out there on Thursday, 3 hours each way, and we sat on her porch with the document between 2 glasses of iced tea. She read it slowly. She's slower than she used to be. When she finished, she took her glasses off and looked out at her tomatoes for a long moment, and then she signed to me. Badly. She never got good at it. She'd learned about 40 signs out of stubbornness. "I'm sorry." Then she picked up the legal pad she still keeps on the porch table and wrote, "Don't do anything yet. Don't tell anyone. Not one person. If he knows the covenant exists before the vote, he gets time, and time is the only thing that can beat you here. Do you understand me, Eleanor? I understood her. We had until the 19th of October. 12 days. Patricia would draft the notice. I would keep going to work, and being pleasant, and letting my son take my elbow like my legs had gone bad. Then, on Friday morning, two things happened within an hour of each other. The first was an email to the full board from Daniel, moving the special meeting up from the 19th to the 9th. Scheduling conflict with the buyer's council, it said. Apologies for the short notice. 9 days became 4. The second was worse. Marcy came into my office holding a printout, and she didn't sit down, and she didn't sign anything at all. She just set the page on my desk and put her finger next to a line on it. It was a voting support agreement. Meridian had them from 3 shareholders already, locking in their votes ahead of the meeting. The third signature on it belonged to Hal Brennan. Hal was my chief financial officer for 16 years. Hal drove to my house in an ice storm in 2004 to tell me in person that we'd lost the Fort Worth contract. Hal sat in the front row at Daniel's wedding, and Hal, who is 79 and has a bad hip and a good heart, had signed a piece of paper handing my company to strangers because my son had gone to him privately and told him, gently, that Eleanor wasn't doing well, and that the kindest thing anyone could do for her now was make sure the sale went through, while she still had the dignity to stand at the podium and smile. I kept the appointment. On Monday, the 6th of October, I drove to a medical office park in Plano and told the woman at the desk that I was Eleanor Hayes and that I had an 11 o'clock. She found me in the system. Somebody had booked it on the 14th of September, 2 days after the memo, using my insurance information and my date of birth. I brought my own interpreter. Her name is Denise, and she has worked with me for 11 years, and I paid her out of my own pocket that morning because I did not want a single line item with that doctor's name on it going through my company. He was a good one, as it turned out. Dr. Iredell, maybe 50, and the first thing he did when he walked in was look at me, not at Denise, and ask me what brought me in. I told him the truth. I told him my son had scheduled this appointment without my knowledge, and had written to my board of directors that I was in cognitive decline, and that in 4 days those directors would vote on selling the company I founded. He put his pen down and said, "Well, let's find out." 2 hours. Recall tasks, sequencing, clock drawing, a set of arithmetic problems, a paragraph I had to reproduce from memory. At one point, he gave me a list of 16 unrelated words and came back to them 25 minutes later, and I gave him 14. He asked me to name as many animals as I could in 60 seconds, and I got so competitive about it that he laughed out loud, and I saw it, the whole shape of it, and laughed too. First time I'd laughed in 2 weeks. He wrote his findings that afternoon. Cognition within normal limits for age and education, no evidence of impairment in memory, executive function, or judgment. Patient is deaf and communicates in written English and American Sign Language with full comprehension and no observed deficit. Then he added a line at the bottom that I don't think he had to add. Hearing loss is not a cognitive condition and should not be assessed as one. I asked him to sign 3 original copies. Tuesday, I walked the shop floor, which I did twice a week anyway, so nobody thought anything of it. I stopped at Tomas's station and wrote on my pad the way I always do, and after we'd talked about the primer batch and the compressor that keeps tripping, I wrote, "Do the guys think something's going on?" He read it. He wiped his hands on a rag longer than he needed to. Then he took my pad and wrote back, in careful block letters, a man who taught himself English at 22 and is still a little shy about his spelling. Elena. They've been walking the plant with clipboards for 3 weeks. Nobody in a suit walks a plant unless somebody is buying it. We've been waiting for you to tell us. He'd called me Elena for 28 years because he heard it wrong the first day, and neither of us ever fixed it. I wrote, "Give me until Thursday." He nodded once and went back to work. And that was the whole conversation, and I walked out to my car and sat in it for a while. Wednesday, I did nothing but wait. Patricia drove in from Fredericksburg and stayed at a hotel near Lovefield, and she and Marcy and I sat in that hotel room with room service coffee going cold and went through it one more time. The covenant, the memo, which was the trigger, the board packet distribution list, which proved the memo had been delivered to third parties, Dr. Iodell's letter, the share ledger, and the arithmetic of what happens to a vote when 26% of it stops existing. Patricia wrote on her pad, "You understand this ends things with him." I wrote back, "He ended things with him." She read that, and then she reached over and put her hand flat on top of mine and left it there, which from Patricia Ordonez is roughly the equivalent of another woman weeping. That night, Vanessa texted me a video of Ruby at her school assembly, 9 years old, standing at the edge of a stage in a green shirt, doing the hand motions to a song she'd learned. I watched it maybe 6 times. My son married a decent woman and made a wonderful kid, and there is no version of what happened next where any of that stopped being true. And anybody who tells you these things come apart cleanly has never had to do it. Thursday, the 9th of October, 9 in the morning, 4th floor. They'd catered it. There was a fruit tray, which tells you exactly how confident a man is. Kemper was there with 2 people from Meridian, and the young woman with the tablet, whose name I finally learned that morning was Andrea Sung. Hal Brennan came in on his cane and would not look at me, and I want to say that I hated him in that moment, but I didn't. He looked like a man who'd been told a lie so gently he'd mistaken it for kindness. 7 directors, 2 lawyers, my son at the head of the table in a blue suit, and a chair for me, 2 seats down. I sat in it. Marcy sat behind me along the wall with a leather portfolio on her lap, and Patricia sat next to her in a gray jacket she'd bought in the 90s, and Daniel glanced at them, and I watched him decide they were an assistant and a friend. He ran the meeting well, I'll give him that. He walked them through the offer, the multiple, the retention packages, the timeline. He said the word legacy 4 times. At about the 11-minute mark, he did the thing he does, the lean, the slight forward tilt I taught him in the kitchen on Vandalia Street, and he said that this transaction honored everything his mother had spent her life building. Then he turned toward me, half a turn, not all the way, and said to the room, "And I want to say, on the record, that my mother has been an incredible partner through this process." He didn't look at my face when he said it. 20 minutes later, the lawyer from Meridian called the vote on the resolution, and I raised my hand. Daniel smiled at me, patient, and said, clearly, slowly, the way you'd talk to someone in the last row, "Mom, we're just doing the formal vote now. Marcy can walk you through it after." I stood up. And I signed to the room. And Denise, who had been sitting quietly by the window since 8:45, and whom my son had assumed was somebody's paralegal, stood up as well and began to speak for me in a clear, unhurried voice that carried all the way down that table. And what she said was, "Before you vote, I'd like everyone here to look at a document my son signed in 2011. Marcy opened the portfolio and started handing out folders. The arithmetic took 11 minutes. Meridian's lawyer read the covenant twice, then asked Patricia 3 questions, and Patricia answered all of them without raising her voice or opening a single other document. The memo of September 12th had been delivered to 7 directors and to outside counsel, which made it a representation to third parties, which meant the voting rights on 26% of Hayes Industrial Coatings had ceased to exist on the day my son typed it. Not suspended, ceased. Patricia had written it that way in 2011 over a check cashing place on Ross Avenue because I'd told her about a quarter turn in a consultation room. Kemper closed his portfolio, said something polite to the table, and left with his people. Andrea Sung was the last one out, and at the door she stopped, turned all the way around so I could see her face, and signed thank you. The real one, learned properly from someone. Then we voted, and I voted no, and it was over. Hal Brennan came around the table on his cane and couldn't get anything out. I took his hands. He'd driven to my house in an ice storm once, and a man can be wrong and still be the man who did that. Daniel didn't say anything at all. He sat at the head of my table with the folder open in front of him, looking at his own signature from when he was 24, and for the first time in about 2 years he looked directly at my face and held it. I don't know what he was hoping to find there. I let him look. Then I gathered my papers and went downstairs. Tomas had the floor shut down before I got there. 91 people in the smell of solvent under the bad fluorescent light, and Denise stood on a pallet beside me so everybody could hear it. And I told them a company from Houston had wanted to buy us and the answer had been no. Tomas knew before I finished. I watched him figure it out about 6 words early and put his hand over his mouth. And then the whole floor went up, and I stood on the concrete I'd been walking since 1997 and let it wash over me without hearing 1 second of it. That's not the part I think about at night, though. The part I think about is the Sunday after, when Vanessa brought Ruby to my house because we had agreed, the two of us, in a hard and careful phone conversation, that whatever happened between the adults was not going to happen to that child. Ruby sat on my kitchen counter eating grapes and told me about the crayon boy, and then she asked me, with her fast, wrong, beautiful hands, why her dad wasn't going to work at Grand's company anymore. I had about a second to decide what kind of grandmother I was going to be. I told her that her father and I had disagreed about something big, that grown-ups sometimes do, and that it had nothing to do with her, and never would. She thought about it. Then she asked if he was still allowed to come to my house, and I said of course he is. And she said okay, and asked for more grapes. I don't know if he'll come. It's been 7 months. Last week there was an envelope in my mailbox with his handwriting on it, and nothing inside but a photograph of the garage on Harry Hines, the one that sells tires now. No note. I keep it in the drawer with Patricia's document. I saved the company and I don't have my son, and both of those are true at the same time, and anyone who promises you a clean ending is selling something. But here's what I keep coming back to. He talked in front of me for 20 minutes that day, and never once thought the woman 2 chairs down was reading every word. That mistake is older than my son and bigger than my company. People decide that quiet means empty, that if you take the world in a different way, you must be taking in less of it. I was never not listening. I was just doing it with my eyes. There's a woman named Denise who has stood beside me for 11 years and put my words into a room, and there's a man named Tomas who has called me the wrong name since 1998, and there's a 9-year-old in Preston Hollow who taught herself my language off a phone because nobody offered to teach her. Those are my people. That's what got saved. Stay close, because there's another story I've been carrying, about a woman who found out what her family really thought of her from 4 minutes of a video call she wasn't supposed to see. And I think you'll want to hear how that one ended.